My name is Sarah Miller, and one simple question changed my marriage forever. I did not yell, I did not argue, I did not accuse anyone. I only asked my husband one quiet question. After that, he stopped speaking to me. Not for one day, not for 2 days, for weeks. He acted as if I no longer existed. We lived in the same house. We ate at the same table. We slept in the same bedroom. But he never spoke a single word to me. At first, I thought he was angry. Then I believed he needed time to calm down. Later, I realized something much worse. His silence was not temporary. It was a punishment. Looking back now, I understand that those silent weeks changed my life more than anything else. But before I tell you how it happened, you need to understand where I came from. I grew up in a small Amish community. Life there was simple. No electricity, no television, no computers, horse and buggy instead of cars. People often think that kind of life is peaceful. Sometimes it was, but there were also many rules, especially for women. From the time I was very young, I learned to stay quiet. My mother always reminded me that a good daughter listened more than she talked. During church, if I whispered even one question, she gently touched my arm. Be still. Those words became part of my life. At home, at church, everywhere. As I grew older, I noticed the women around me. They worked from early morning until late at night. They cooked, they cleaned, they raised children. But they rarely shared their opinions. The men made the important decisions. The women accepted them. That was simply how life worked. Or at least, that was what I believed. When I turned 19, I married a man named Jacob. We had spoken only a few times before the wedding. That was completely normal in our community. After the ceremony, I moved into his home. From that day forward, I was expected to become a good wife. I truly wanted to. Jacob worked hard. He never wasted money. He cared about the farm. Most people respected him. He was not a cruel man. At least, not in the way most people imagine. He never hit me. He never shouted. He never called me bad names. But he also never talked very much. Most evenings we sat together in complete silence. He read the newspaper. I washed dishes. Sometimes an entire hour passed without either of us saying anything. At first, I thought that was simply part of marriage. Nobody had taught me differently. Every morning began the same way. I woke before sunrise, started the fire, prepared breakfast, fed the chickens, collected eggs, cleaned the kitchen. Then I moved on to the next job. There was always another job waiting. Life followed the same routine every day. Months passed. Then one afternoon, something happened. I was cleaning our bedroom, dusting shelves, straightening blankets, moving books. While cleaning Jacob's nightstand, I noticed our family Bible lying open. That surprised me. Jacob rarely read books unless they were connected to work. As I lifted the Bible, an envelope slipped onto the floor. I picked it up. The letter had come from a bank. Across the top of the page, one word immediately caught my attention. Mortgage. I froze. Our community believed people should avoid debt whenever possible. Borrowing large amounts of money was not something anyone talked about openly. I carefully placed the paper back where I found it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why had Jacob borrowed money? Why hadn't he mentioned it? For days, I carried those questions inside me. Every time I wanted to ask, I stopped myself. Good wives did not question financial decisions. That was what I had always been taught. Still, the question refused to disappear. One evening, I finished washing the supper dishes. Jacob sat at the table reading his newspaper. The house felt unusually quiet. I dried one last pan. Then I turned toward him. My heart beat so fast I thought he might hear it. Finally, I spoke. Jacob, why did you take a mortgage on the farm? The words were barely louder than a whisper. The room became completely still. The newspaper slowly lowered. Jacob looked directly at me. I had never seen that expression before. There was no anger, no surprise, only a cold look that made me feel like a stranger inside my own home. Without saying a single word, he folded the newspaper, very carefully, very slowly. He stood up, walked past me, opened the front door, then disappeared outside. I remained standing beside the sink. I waited for him to come back. I expected an explanation, or maybe an argument. Instead, only silence came back into the house. That night, supper stayed on the table until it became cold. Jacob never came inside. Hours later, I finally went upstairs. When he entered the bedroom, he did not climb into bed. Instead, he took an old blanket from a wooden chest. Then he spread it across the floor. Without looking at me, he lay down. His back faced me. I stared at the ceiling until morning. I kept asking myself the same question. What had I done? Had one simple question really changed everything? I still didn't know it then, but that single sentence had started the hardest weeks of my entire life. After that night, everything changed. The next morning, I woke before sunrise as usual. I lit the stove, made breakfast, set the table. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. Jacob came downstairs without looking at me. I placed a cup of coffee beside his plate. Usually he nodded. Sometimes he quietly said thank you. That morning, nothing. He picked up the cup, drank his coffee, finished his breakfast, then walked outside. Not one word. I stood alone in the kitchen. At first, I thought he simply needed time. Maybe he was upset. Maybe he would speak after work. That evening, I prepared his favorite meal, fresh bread, beef stew, homemade butter. I hoped it might help. He came inside, washed his hands, sat at the table, ate every bite, then stood up and walked away. Again, without speaking. The silence hurt more than I expected. If he had shouted, I would have known he was angry. If he had argued, I could have apologized. But silence gave me nothing. No answers. No chance to explain. Only confusion. That night, he slept on the floor again. His blanket stayed beside the wall. Mine stayed on the bed. The space between us felt larger than the room itself. By the third day, I started blaming myself. Maybe I should never have asked. Maybe good wives really stayed out of financial matters. Maybe I had crossed a line I didn't understand. I replayed the moment again and again. The same 6 words. Why did you take a mortgage on the farm? The question sounded harmless now, yet somehow it had destroyed our peace. A week passed. Jacob still refused to speak. We lived together like strangers. Every morning I prepared breakfast. Every afternoon I worked in the garden. Every evening I cooked supper. He accepted everything, but never looked at me. If I entered one room, he quietly left it. If I handed him something, he took it without making eye contact. I had never felt so invisible. Soon I stopped trying to start conversations. There seemed no reason. Silence always answered. After several days, I began leaving small notes on the kitchen table. We need more flour. Your mother stopped by today. The cow seems sick. The notes disappeared. I knew he read them, but he never replied. Not one word. Even Sunday became painful. We attended church together. Men sat on one side, women on the other. From across the room, I could see Jacob. He talked to other men. He smiled. He even laughed once. But when church ended, he walked past me as though I wasn't there. Some of the women noticed. I could feel their eyes following us. Nobody asked questions. Nobody offered comfort. Everyone pretended everything was normal. That silence felt almost as painful as Jacob's. One afternoon, I visited my mother. She immediately noticed something was wrong. She asked if I was feeling sick. I almost told her everything. The words reached my lips. Then I stopped. I had been raised to protect my marriage. Talking about problems outside the home felt like another betrayal. So I smiled, said I was only tired, then changed the subject. On my walk home, I realized something. I no longer knew who I was. I spent every day cooking for someone who ignored me, cleaning a house where I felt like a guest, sleeping beside someone who treated me like air. The loneliness became physical. Sometimes I caught myself talking aloud while hanging laundry, only to hear another human voice, even if that voice was my own. One evening, I accidentally dropped a plate. It shattered across the kitchen floor. The loud sound echoed through the house. Jacob walked into the room. For 1 second, I thought he might finally speak. Instead, he looked at the broken pieces, turned around, and walked away, without a single word. I sat on the floor surrounded by broken pottery. For the first time in my marriage, I cried without trying to hide it. No one came. No one asked if I was all right. Only the sound of my own tears filled the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared into the darkness. Then something unexpected happened. A thought entered my mind. Maybe this silence isn't about my question. Maybe it's about the answer. Maybe Jacob wasn't angry because I asked. Maybe he was afraid because I had discovered something. The mortgage, the hidden letter, the way he reacted. None of it made sense anymore. Unless there was a much bigger secret hiding behind that piece of paper. For the first time since everything began, I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong and started asking, what was Jacob trying so hard to hide? Months passed before I finally understood the truth. The silence was never really about my question. It was about what my question had uncovered. Once that thought entered my mind, I started paying attention to small details, things I had ignored before. Every evening, Jacob worked later than usual. Sometimes he stayed in the barn long after dark. Other nights, he disappeared without explaining where he had been. Before all this happened, I never questioned it. Now, every little thing seemed important. One afternoon, I was hanging clothes outside when our neighbor, Mr. Fisher, stopped beside the fence. He smiled politely. Then he asked if Jacob was home. I told him he was working in the fields. Mr. Fisher nodded. Before leaving, he quietly said something that stayed in my mind. Tell him the payment is due next week. Then he quickly walked away. Payment? What payment? Our neighbors almost never spoke about money. The words made my stomach tighten. That evening, Jacob came home after sunset. His boots were covered with mud. His face looked exhausted. I wanted to ask about Mr. Fisher. Instead, I stayed quiet. I already knew what silence felt like. I didn't want another wall between us. Still, questions kept growing inside me. A few days later, Jacob left before sunrise. He forgot his work jacket. I picked it up to take it outside. As I lifted it, something heavy fell from the pocket. A small notebook landed on the floor. I stared at it for several seconds. I knew I should leave it alone. But I also knew my marriage had already changed. Slowly, I opened it. Inside were numbers, dates, payments, amounts of money. There were also several names. One of them belonged to the same bank I had seen on the mortgage paper. Another page listed overdue payments. My hands started shaking. This was much bigger than I imagined. Jacob wasn't hiding one loan. He was hiding serious financial problems. I quickly closed the notebook, then placed it exactly where I had found it. When Jacob returned home, I said nothing. Not because I was afraid anymore, because I wanted to understand everything first. Over the next week, another strange thing happened. 2 men wearing regular English clothes visited our farm. That almost never happened. They stayed outside talking with Jacob for nearly an hour. Their conversation looked serious. One man pointed toward the barn. The other opened a folder filled with papers. Jacob signed something. Then both men drove away. I watched everything through the kitchen window. He never noticed. That night, he still refused to speak. But I noticed something different. His shoulders looked heavy. He seemed worried. For the first time, I wondered if he was suffering too. Not because of me, because of whatever secret he was carrying. Days later, I visited the local feed store. While waiting in line, I overheard two farmers talking. One mentioned rising costs, the other complained about poor harvests. Then one man quietly said, "Some people are borrowing more money than they can ever repay." Those words immediately reminded me of Jacob. When I returned home, I looked around the farm differently. The old fence that needed repairs, the broken wagon sitting beside the barn, the fields that had produced less corn than usual. Maybe everything was connected. Maybe Jacob had borrowed money trying to save the farm. If that was true, why hide it from me? Marriage was supposed to mean facing problems together. Instead, we were living in two different worlds, one silent, one full of unanswered questions. That evening, something unexpected happened. I found Jacob sitting alone in the barn. He didn't know I was there. His head rested in his hands. For several minutes, he stayed completely still. Then I heard something I never expected. He was crying, very quietly, almost silently. I had never seen him cry before. Not once. In that moment, I realized something important. The silence was hurting both of us, just in different ways. I wanted to walk over, place my hand on his shoulder, tell him we could face this together. Instead, I quietly turned around, because I knew one thing. Until Jacob chose honesty, nothing I said would change his mind. But I also made another decision that night. If he never spoke again, I would no longer spend my life waiting. For weeks I had blamed myself. I had begged for forgiveness. I had questioned my own worth. Now that was over. I finally understood. A question never destroys a healthy marriage. Secrets do. And I was no longer willing to live inside someone else's secret. That decision became the first step toward changing my future forever. Jacob did not speak that night, or the next day, or the day after that. But something had changed. For the first time since all this began, I stopped waiting for him to fix everything. I realized that if our marriage was going to survive, both of us would have to face the truth, not just me. A few mornings later, I found an envelope sitting on the kitchen table. There was no name on it. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Only one sentence was written. "Meet me in the barn after supper." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. I knew Jacob had written it. That evening, I finished washing the dishes as usual. The house felt strangely quiet. When the sun began to set, I walked slowly toward the barn. Jacob was already there. He stood beside an old wooden workbench. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I owe you the truth." Those words were something I had been waiting to hear for months. He took a deep breath. Then he began telling me everything. 3 years before our wedding, his father became seriously ill. The farm stopped making enough money. Medical bills grew quickly. At the same time, several harvests failed because of bad weather. The family borrowed money to keep the farm alive. At first, everyone believed things would improve, but they never did. The debt became larger every year. When Jacob's father passed away, the responsibility fell on him. He inherited the farm. He also inherited every unpaid loan. Jacob admitted he was ashamed. He believed a good Amish man should provide for his family without borrowing money. Every payment reminded him that he had failed. When we married, he wanted to tell me everything. More than once he tried, but each time, fear stopped him. He worried I would leave. He worried I would lose respect for him. So he stayed silent. Then one day, I found the mortgage paper. The question I asked did not create the problem. It simply exposed it. Jacob looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I wasn't angry because you asked. I was afraid because I could no longer hide." Hearing those words changed everything. For months, I believed I had destroyed our marriage. Now I understood the truth. The silence had started long before my question. It had started the day fear became stronger than honesty. I slowly walked closer to him. Then I asked another question. Why didn't you trust me? Jacob lowered his head. I thought protecting you meant hiding the truth. He paused before continuing. But all I really did was leave you alone. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The barn remained completely quiet. Outside, I could hear the horses moving softly. Finally, I reached for his hand. I cannot change the past, but I don't want us to live like strangers anymore. Jacob nodded. Then, for the first time in many weeks, he hugged me. Both of us cried, not because every problem had disappeared, because the silence finally had. Over the next several months, we worked together instead of separately. We created a budget. We sold equipment we no longer needed. We accepted help from trusted relatives. The work was difficult. Some days felt impossible. But every decision was made together. No more hidden papers. No more secret loans. No more unanswered questions. Slowly, the debt became smaller. Our marriage became stronger. Years later, people often asked how we survived such a difficult season. My answer was always the same. It wasn't money that nearly destroyed us. It was silence. Debt can be repaid. Trust takes much longer. Today, when young couples ask me for advice before marriage, I tell them something very simple. Never be afraid of honest conversations. Money problems can be solved. Fear can be faced. Mistakes can be forgiven. But silence grows heavier every single day. Looking back now, I no longer remember that question with regret. I remember it with gratitude. Because one quiet sentence forced us to face the truth. And the truth, painful as it was, gave us a chance to build a better future. If there is one lesson my story teaches, it is this. A marriage is not built by hiding problems. It is built by facing them together. Sometimes the hardest question is also the most important one. Mine was only 6 words. Why did you take a mortgage on the farm? Those 6 words changed our lives forever, but they also saved our marriage.